Hello and welcome to conference this week. We are still on the topic of Ashtanga. And, one of these days I'm going to change the semester, but I'm still having fun with it. So we're still, why Ashtanga? And the last month we've been talking about our anniversary, and we read our poem that Tim Miller read for our first puja, Work in the Invisible, and sort of focusing on how Ashtanga is so amazing as a method of yoga, because all yoga has this quality, but there's some special things about Ashtanga I'm going to talk about today that have to do with working as much in the invisible as we're working in the visible. So we've been talking about the posters that are on the wall that have the getting out of our normal habitual physical patterns and breathing patterns and moving deeper into opening our bodies and breathing into those openings in our body. And also this last week we talked about how doing that would actually break habitual patterns of our thinking self and of our emotional self and so our spiritual self. And in order to understand that from a yoga philosophy point of view, we studied the nadis, the energy channels. We studied the vayus, the hot water goes in the bathtub and we push it around with the current like our hand, so we get the prana and the hot water to move all around the body rather than staying in one place. And then lastly, we talked about these things called the chakras. You know, we hear about them so much and see pictures and their colors and all these different things, but for us it's literally part of why we're here on our yoga mat as opposed to being at the gym. And so I asked all of you, what do the chakras have to do with your Mysore practice, your primary lead series that you're going to do today? How does that work? Energy. So we've been talking about how this is an energy practice, a pranic practice. Even I've gone so far as to identify it as energy medicine. What we're going to do for the next hour and a half is literally medicine for your body and medicine for your energy self. So the chakras are energy centers, but how does that work? So we're going to do primary series, and my little diagrams of the snowmen say that we're going to push water around the body. That's not water, it's actually energy through currents. We're going to get it into my chest, into my throat, into my spine, my digestion, all the way down to my feet. So then what about the chakras? This is all last week. How do you just tell me one or two ways that you know you're going to do primary series and that's going to service, that's a word I've been using, it's going to service your emotional or your spiritual self through the chakras? Yeah. So every time we do, so here's just an example that Karen's saying, every time we do upward dog, which is a lot, upward dog, upward dog, upward dog, we're going to open the physical body, we're going to breathe pink into that orange zone, and we're going to, as far as the chakras are concerned, what happened there? Every time you go. Yeah, so you open the heart, and so which chakra is that? Heart. Look at the snowman. It's the fourth button on the snowman. Moving upward, that button is green. And it's all about love and compassion and forgiveness. So if you came to practice and you were being a poopy head and you were mad at somebody that almost cut you off and you just got here and you were just cranky. Maybe you were cranky about something before someone almost cut you off. And then, you just started doing sun salutes, up dog, up dog, up dog. We get to the floor, vinyasa, vinyasa, up dog, up dog. And by the end of practice, for the most part, if the medicine's working, we feel like we opened that area back up emotionally and we feel like we can let it go. We feel compassionate. We feel loving again. We feel like, oh gosh, it's not such a big deal, or whatever that was. So has anyone in this room ever experienced that? Yes. Yeah, it actually works. It's not just this yoga philosophy weirdo stuff that's super old and not applicable. It's the opposite. It's eternal almost. It's part of how we're wired. It's the wiring we just can't see, but it's how we're wired, and it affects our physiology. And every time we come here and we open our hearts up and we breathe deep, we release emotions that have to do with these different energy centers. And so when we get into things that have to do with, hips and opening stuck hip joints and stuff, there's all kind of lower chakra stuff that's associated with that, which maybe might be fun to do our next semester and maybe studying that a little bit deeper. But this week, I got super excited about talking about how we actually, in Ashtanga, more so maybe than any other practice, facilitate moving into these energy centers and moving deeper into the aspects of ourself that are sort of the invisible aspects. So we come to the class, and I use this example because we just completed our first Ashtanga teacher training here, which was called the Path of Light, and how these folks that were here, some of you are in the room, love this practice so much you decided to take the light it's been on your path and be a bearer of light and give that to others. And we had this one primary practice where I had the teachers calling out the poses, and I was just a student in the class while the teachers were calling out the poses. And there was this really beautiful silence, and you could hear everyone breathing. And looking back on it now, I'm sure part of it was that everyone was so nervous, right? But at the end of practice, I let everyone call out the poses. Different students were calling out the poses, but at the end I came and I closed the practice. And for me, my best teaching days are the days where I just get out of the way and I let something come through me. And I was just in that moment of closing the class, and it just struck me how beautiful the silence was. And this is one place that we come in our lives for that silence. And that these teachers were training to become teachers that could hold space for other people to be silent. And it made me think of how noisy our lives are. When we think about what that actually means, is or sort of a metaphor, but it's also just reality, is that our lives are very noisy. Our phones are always going off. We're just bombarded with like noise, do this, fix this, all these different things that are constantly at us, talking to us, be better, do this, did you get enough, it's the chatter of life. When we talk about Viktor Frankl's quote, the stimulus and response, it's life's stimulus. And we know that we need that space in between that Viktor Frankl talks about. That space in between is what gives us the liberation to make better choices in our life. But we're so busy sometimes we don't have that space. We're just in response to stimulus. So being here on your mat doing Ashtanga, an Ashtanga teacher is really meant to hold that silence for you, so that I call out directives, but I'm not just yammering on the whole time about express yourself and extend your arm and around to your heart. And one of the teacher trainers that was there, he said, I realized, first off, he was saying how it's changed his life in just a matter of a year and a half. It completely has transformed him. But he said, one of the things I fell in love with about this practice, more so than the other yoga classes I had been going to, was that you're as a teacher, when you're calling out the poses, it's very quiet. It's silent. And in a Mysore practice, it's silent. And if people are talking, like that's the one thing, if you're going to get in trouble with me, you're going to get in trouble for talking, being like chattery in a class. But even for me, when I'm calling out a pose, and I was teaching these new teachers how to call out poses, I'm like, give few directives. Inhale your arms up. Exhale, bend forward. And even they're the same directives you've heard a million times. You don't even need me to say, inhale your arms up, because we all know your arms are going up, but it almost becomes like a meditation. Inhale your arms up. Exhale, bend forward. Rather than inhale your arms up and lengthen your spine and express yourself to the fullest. Right? That would be noise. That would start to become noise. But in that silence that we create here for you, you go into this internal place that we can't necessarily go when there's all this noise. But it's like a moving meditation. We always say Ashtanga is a moving meditation where I move into a silent space, and there I find myself. And sometimes we find ourselves in that noisy head. What am I going to do later today? What happened yesterday? And we realize, oh, I'm not in the present moment. I'm in my busy head. And we try to come back to this breath, right? So how Ashtangi does that is we use a very specific drishti. We don't close our eyes. We use a very specific breath to focus on. And all of that is how we cultivate this silence that brings us to, when we talk about the plant Susan and all the koshas, that takes us into these really deep internal parts of ourself that sometimes in our busy lives don't get fed, don't get noticed. And it is here then often that becomes your sanctuary or your sacred place, because it's the place where you just get to listen and be present. And I wanted to share my mantra, if I haven't already, with you. And if I have, I'd hope that it's your mantra and not just my mantra. But my mantra for all of you when I hold space as a teacher is, there's nothing to prove. There's nothing to figure out. There's no one to impress. And there's one other one. What is it? I'll remember it. There's no competition. I love that one. So when we're doing our poses, rather than, I've been saying this, I think it's a slippery slope for any yoga practitioner, but especially in Ashtanga, that we start to see the pose we talked about as the destination. And I'm trying to wrap, and I'm trying to wrap, and it becomes about this pose about wrapping, or whatever that is. But we realize when we have these conversations about working in the invisible and all the pranic work that we're doing in the chakras and the emotion, is that it's the pose itself, the asana, is just a vehicle. It's a vehicle to get us somewhere. And the place we're trying to go isn't the pose. Interestingly enough, we go from one pose to the next pose to the next pose, and every pose has its own beauty, its own way of opening you up. It has its own way of opening stuck places. It has its own way of opening up different chakras, different emotional points. And if we start to breathe and move in that way where I am letting this practice, I'm letting these poses, I'm letting these vinyasas actually service me, service my physical body, service my energy body, and service my spiritual, my emotional body, then we get so much out of it. So I'm coming around to this really important place. So when we think about what we're really doing on our mats and we're getting closer to ourselves, we're quiet, we're listening to ourselves, we're svadhyaya, we're studying ourselves, we're getting close to us. What is underneath all that, I feel like Anita Moranjani, when we watched her TED Talks last week, she sort of like boiled it all down to one thing. When you take your last breath, what is it all going to come down to? And I think when we're on our mat, like this is the thing that we're training for, When we take our last breath, it really touches like how we're living our lives. And what did she say it all boils down to? We've been saying this for years. I never get sick of hearing it. I never get sick of saying it. Love. It's all boils down to loving yourself and loving other people. So this practice is really meant to get us close to ourselves and get us closer to like really, really loving ourselves and really, really loving others. This quote is by Lama Surya Das, and my example was this little girl that comes here with her mom sometimes. It's just pure love to me. Like I don't earn it. I didn't do anything, but just I love her and she loves me, and we twirl each other around. I twirl her around more than she twirls me around. And on our website, we have a picture of her with Buddha, who she's totally in love with this Buddha. She has tea parties with Buddha and talks to Buddha, and she's teaching Buddha the ABCs, and sometimes she dances with Buddha. But there's this picture that her mom woke up and saw her, heard her talking, and went into a room and saw her like just looking into Buddha. So this picture on our website of Lainey and her best friend Buddha is this picture of her staring at him, and it is one of the most beautiful pictures of love. You just get like what pure love looks like when you see this. So Lama Surya Das said this, and I just think it's the most beautiful quote that encapsulates everything we've been talking about. He said, learning how to love is the goal and the purpose of spiritual life, not learning how to develop psychic powers, not learning how to bow, chant, do yoga, or even meditate, but learning to love. Love is the truth. Love is the light. So honoring each of you for being committed to a practice that is going to bring your heart wide open and bring you deeper into a sense of love. Namaste.